The mess hall at FOB Bastion reeked of burnt coffee and dust, a dry grit that clung to the throat and refused to leave. Overhead fans hummed lazily, circulating heat more than air, as trays clattered and radios emitted bursts of static from the corners. At a side table, a young corporal hunched over a battered field radio, her hands steady as she tightened a screw, dark hair falling forward as if shielding her from prying eyes. "Look at her," muttered a Marine, loud enough for others to hear, smirking. "She can fix a wire, but she can't fix a war." Laughter rippled down the row, chuckles and clanging utensils meant to sting. She didn't respond, didn't even glance up. Her focus remained locked on the radio, as if the world had shrunk to that broken machine. Corporal Sarah Whitaker was 27, though life in Afghanistan had etched lines around her eyes, making her seem older. She didn't command attention when she entered a room lean tan from the desert sun, dark brown hair usually tucked back. A small scar along her wrist was perhaps the only detail that might have caught notice. She was a 25U, a signal support specialist, the one who kept radios talking, computers alive, and communications intact amid chaos. To infantry, she was the cable clerk. 2 SOF units passing through FOB Bastion, she was the quiet figure in the corner of the command tent, surrounded by wires and static. Useful? Yes. Respectable? Not in their eyes. The fight, they believed, belonged to those kicking down doors, not the ones tightening screws in silence. Sarah had heard every whisper before. She makes coffee for the radios. Good with gadgets, not guns. The words slid off her, but the sting lingered. Behind her quiet eyes was something she never shared, a skill and resolve that earned her far more than the right to sit behind wires. But some things didn't need explaining. Her quirk was simple but telling. A worn screwdriver always in her cargo pocket. Not army-issued, not remarkable, but belonging to her father. A Vietnam veteran who had once told her, "The right tool in the right hands can save lives." For him it had meant patching radios under fire. For her, it was a connection to him and a reminder of the duty few others understood. Her father's dog tags rested in her chest pocket, pressing lightly whenever she bent over a console. Her mother, a school teacher in Fagville, wanted her to stay home, get a degree, maybe follow in her footsteps. But Sarah had inherited her father's stubborn streak. Swearing the oath, she had known she wasn't meant to stand in shadows. And yet, that's exactly where people kept her. Background noise, invisible until something broke. No one noticed the scar on her wrist or questioned the discipline behind her calm movements. Walking across the dusty yard, her posture hinted she'd done more than repair radios, but no one looked closer, and she didn't correct them. Let them believe what they wanted. Infantry boys flexed. Special operators carried reputations and night vision goggles. And Sarah? She kept her head down, screwdriver close, alone in the mess hall. Staring into a chipped mug of bad coffee, her mind sometimes wandered back to North Carolina. Fagville, shadowed by Fort Bragg, had produced kids either fleeing the military or growing up with it in their blood. Sarah was the latter, running laps around the airfield fences as a teen, timing herself to PT cadence calls. Those moments now reflected in her eyes, older than her years. At Bastion, though, respect came from noise. She was dismissed as the quiet one with wires. No battlefield stories, no medals, just hands that never shook while stripping copper and soldering connections in stifling heat. Irony, she had faced fire they couldn't imagine mortar landing nearby. The ground trembling, silence on the radio meaning lives slipping away. She carried those moments like shadows, invisible until the lights went out or comms failed. She didn't seek approval. But when laughter got loud or someone muttered "clerk," she would catch her reflection in a dusty screen and remind herself, soldiers aren't defined by who notices them. They're defined by what they do when no one else can. Days blurred at FOB Bastion, dust seeping into every corner. Meals were her only pause, but even then, the divide was clear. Carrying a tray through the mess hall, she learned to walk past shifting packs and mocking glances, sliding into a corner alone with lukewarm food and coffee. The silence at her table was louder than chatter elsewhere, not respect, but dismissal. One afternoon, Sergeant with a chest full of combat patches plopped down nearby, grinning too wide to be genuine. "Hey, cable girl," he called, loud enough for his squad to laugh. "Got any wires you can twist for us today?" Chuckles followed. Sarah didn't flinch, chewing slowly, eyes on the chipped table. The nickname stuck, Cable Girl. Whispered, smirked, rolled eyes, it trailed her everywhere. She stayed silent, moving with a steady rhythm, screwdriver and radio parts clinking quietly in her pack. Rumors followed. A private claimed she'd made it through training only because standards for women were lowered. Laughter echoed in the smoke pit as she walked by. Sarah caught fragments, soft standards, not the real army. She kept walking, boots crunching gravel, posture upright, eyes forward. Exclusion grew sidestepping, ignored. Her name erased from duty boards. She was kept inside the wire, her value dismissed. Yet the dismissal worked in her favor. Not the mockery itself she'd heard worse, but the refusal to see her beyond the box they'd shoved her into. Every squad heading to the gate passed her by, rifles slung, helmets tight. They saw her as invisible, yet she carried knowledge that had once been life-saving. She never lashed out, never raised her voice, never snapped. She stayed steady, screwdriver in pocket, dog tags pressing against her chest, silently daring the universe to prove her right. Sometimes the loudest answer to ridicule is no answer at all. By midday, the Cums tent was an oven, canvas walls pressing down, radios hissing and clicking, static filling gaps. For most, background noise. For Sarah, the only sound she trusted. Hunched over a battered receiver, she twisted a dial with steady fingers, sweat tracing her temple. During one long intercept, a garbled push-toe message bled through the static. Barely a whisper, yet she muttered a quiet translation. Nearby, a sergeant froze, uncertain if he'd heard correctly. Later, the story slipped into the smoke pit. She spoke push-toe fluently. Laughter at first, but thinner. Some brows furrowed, curiosity stirring. Another clue appeared. A private. Reaching for tape in her pack, brushed against a worn sheet of paper. Sarah's hand snatched it back. He glimpsed the header, a formal commendation for distinguished service. Word spread quietly. Whispers questioned how a cable clerk could earn such recognition. Even her tattoo drew attention wings with lightning bolts on her forearm. It's familiar to anyone in combat, aviation, or joint ops. Gradually, mockery dulled. Sidelong glances replaced loud jeers. Soldiers lingered longer, watching her stay steady under scrutiny, carrying something unspoken. Her muttered translations. The glimpse of a commendation. The tattoo they stacked like puzzle pieces no one wanted to assemble. Cable Girl. Nobody dared ask directly. Her silence remained, screwdriver turning in careful circles, posture unchanged. But if one looked closely, they might catch the faintest smirk as she returned her father's screwdriver to her pocket. Knowing the truth was approaching, the call came just after dusk, horizon fading from red sand to black. A convoy had been ambushed outside the wire. First reports crackled over the net. Contact. Casualties, multiple vehicles disabled, asterisk within seconds. The command post erupted into chaos, radios barking. Officers leaning over maps under harsh fluorescent lights, voices competing over the roar of panic. Then, the main Cums went dead. The hum of machines vanished, the vital link to the convoy gone in a single crackle of static. Fear rippled through the room. A major slammed his fist on the console. Another officer yelled into a dead handset as if sheer volume could revive it. Eyes widened, breaths quickened, the air thick with tension. In the midst of the storm, Sarah Whitaker moved differently. Not fast, but steady. Her fingers danced across the panel, pulling cables, rerouting lines. Calm, methodical, she flipped switches most people didn't even know existed. The small scar on her wrist caught the light as she reached toward the tattoo on her forearm, partially hidden under her rolled-up sleeve. Radio's gone. "We've lost them," barked an officer. "Check again," Sarah replied, quiet, almost a whisper. Yet her voice carried enough authority to freeze a lieutenant mid-dash shout with a few precise twists of her screwdriver. She patched into a backup frequency, rerouted power from a secondary unit. Static cleared. The convoy was back online. Broken voices called in 9-line reports of the wounded. She adjusted the gain until every word sharpened, then slid the headset to the nearest officer. "They're yours again." "Sir." The major stared for a moment too long, then snatched it, barking orders with renewed force. But Sarah wasn't finished. Enemy voices leaked through a captured frequency. She tilted her head, brow furrowed, muttering in a rhythm too exact to be guesswork. It was Pashto, recalled from memory, translated in real time. "They're flanking from the ridge," she said suddenly, "moving east, aiming to cut off reinforcements." The room froze. Eyes locked on her. Clerks, lieutenants, NCOs, who had mocked her, the sergeant who had laughed in her face. All silent. One officer scrambled for the map, tracing the route. She was right. Orders changed in seconds. Reinforcements rerouted, medevac redirected. Lives hung on her words. She delivered them as if reading the weather. When the frequencies stabilized and the map was lit with new markers, Sarah leaned back, hands steady, face calm. The storm had passed, but she hadn't moved like anyone else. She wiped her palm, reached for her screwdriver, muttering almost to herself, "Just doing my job." The silence that followed was different. Not mocking, not dismissive, sharp, uneasy. It asked a question without words. Who is she really? The answer arrived. A Navy SEAL captain, dust streaked across his boots, authority radiating from years of combat, pushed through the tent flap. His eyes scanned past lieutenants and majors until they landed on Sarah. They dropped to her forearm, tattoo exposed, wings split by lightning bolts. The room seemed to hold its breath. "By God, Whitaker," he said, voice cutting through the tension. Not mockery, not curiosity, recognition. "You're staring at the reason half my men are still breathing," he added. Shock rippled faster than laughter had ever done. Soldiers who had shoved her aside, mocked her, smirked, they went slack-jawed as the words sank in. Years ago, in an operation buried under sand and silence, Sarah hadn't been a cable clerk. She had been the forward JTAC for a joint task force pinned under RPG fire in the Helmand corridor. Radios destroyed, chaos everywhere. Her voice cut through the static, calling in airstrikes with precision that saved 2 SEAL platoons. A past she had never spoken of, recorded only in folded commendations tucked deep in her pack. Now, it was no longer hidden. The captain straightened, eyes hard with memory, and did something no one expected. He snapped to attention and saluted. The command post froze. Laughter and whispers evaporated under the weight of his gesture. Marines, who had once mocked her, found their throats dry, eyes downcast. Sarah didn't move immediately. Then, slow and deliberate, she returned the salute, steady, calm, eyes forward. In that silence, respect replaced ridicule. The flap lifted again, letting in cooler night air. The SEAL captain had returned from the edge of the wire, bearing the authority of someone who had seen panic and learned to cut through it. He moved past maps and radios, stopping at her console. Faded tattoo revealed. By God, that's Whitaker. The room froze again. Officers turned, questioning if they had heard correctly. "Stand down." "Everyone, stand down." His voice carried weight no one could ignore. He met her gaze. "You're still hiding in comes." After Helmand, after Operation Red Sand, the name rippled through the room. Red Sand. Legend among veterans. 2 SEAL platoons, trapped, no clean exit, chaos everywhere. Radios failing. Survival, impossible for most. But she had held the net together. For hours under fire, the lifeline for every man who walked out alive, faces went pale. The cable girl they mocked had once saved hundreds from annihilation. She hadn't just repaired radios. She was the radio. She had pulled airstrikes, kept hope alive, ensured extraction. Operation Red Sand, 2012. 4 hours of hell, survival carved into legend, anchored by Sarah Whitaker. The captain saluted. Generators hummed, radios clicked, but inside the post, time froze. Soldiers who had laughed, mocked, excluded her. They were still. No one dared speak. Sarah's eyes, scar-catching console light, met his. Slowly, deliberately, she returned the salute. Calm, steady, humility intact. Respect filled the room. No applause needed. The SEAL captain's salute had spoken for all. The command post came alive again, maps pulled closer. Radios adjusted, reports scribbled, but the air had shifted. Sarah Whitaker didn't linger in recognition. She lowered her head and continued her work, turning her screwdriver. The scar on her wrist catching the glow, tattoo exposed. Greatness doesn't always wear stripes or demand attention. Sometimes, it sits quietly in a hot tent, steady, waiting for the moment it's needed most. Sarah had carried her truth in silence, and when it emerged, she chose humility over pride. That night, the desert cooled, the stars burned, and the camp settled. Soldiers whispered, reflected, replayed the captain's words. One Marine, the one who had called her cable girl, left a steaming cup of coffee beside her tools, wordless. She noticed, lifted the mug, and the gesture said it all. Respect isn't demanded. It's earned, and that night at Bastion, her truth spoke louder than any insult ever could. Courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's steady hands on a radio, silent, holding everything together when chaos strikes. Sarah Whitaker's story is one of those.